There we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the May 21st OpenCrowbar community meeting. I'm not exactly sure where we fit on our cycles, so I'm going to treat this like a planning meeting, and then hopefully we'll go back as needed to a biweekly cadence. Next week, we'd talk about design and choice about design based on things we discuss in planning, and then we'd be back every other week doing planning. Uh, we're working on the agenda here, and the number one thing, and I'm assuming part of the reason for people's interest today, is to talk through the announcement for Dell to pull engineering resources off of the OpenCrowbar project. I'm not going to go through and read the email, but the effect is that Dell has completed funding of Crowbar activities. Envelope release sort of puts OpenCrowbar in a very good state for community to pick it up and start running with it. And I've been asked to continue to help maintain and grow the community as much as the community is interested in participating in that. Um, I've taken inventory of a lot of what's going on in this space. I'm always happy to hear more. It might be something we want to do on an Etherpad. Actually, I think that's exactly what we should do, is do it on an Etherpad. But I haven't seen any other projects that have the breadth of capabilities. Frankly, even Crowbar 1 is still advantaged over a lot of other systems that I've seen. Crowbar 2 is a whole nother level because of the orchestration capabilities, the annealer. So my hope is that we can find ways within the community to increase adoption, that we can find sponsorship through corporate users who want to fund consulting, or companies who just want to take it up and start using it as a primary tool, like Dell, like SUSE has been doing, like Dell had been doing. And there are other players in the community who had embedded Crowbar in, but not been as active in the community. So I actually, having heard from a lot of people, believe that Dell pulling out makes it easier for Crowbar to accomplish the mission of being hardware agnostic. That's something I'd be interested in hearing other people. Is there discussions, questions about that?
Well, I think one thing that would be worth clarifying is the relationship between Crowbar and OpenCrowbar and how that relates to this, because I don't think I understand that myself fully.
Excellent question. Let me put that in for discussion. Other questions? I just want to make sure that before we start that, which I think will be a really interesting topic, to talk through. Are there questions about Dell's involvement? Okay, good. All right. I thought it was pretty straightforward, but makes sense. And then we'll as a separate topic, I was going to talk through community support and options for that. But Adam, I think you're right. Crowbar versus OpenCrowbar is probably the next area to go. You want to lead that off, or did you have just questions?
Yeah, just questions really. I mean, all I know is that SUSE is very actively developing on the Crowbar, effectively on Roxy branch, and Stony following that. And we haven't touched OpenCrowbar. But I've heard from people outside, like last week in Atlanta, people were sort of asking me what's the future direction for OpenCrowbar and how do they relate? Is it one community? Is it two communities? And I couldn't really answer with any surety on that.
Right. And so one of the questions, I think, one of the assumptions I've made is that the architectural limits in Crowbar 1 uh, would effectively limit its life. And changes that SUSE has made in supporting, working on the Stony Branch may have addressed some of those architectural limitations. We should put those on the table and figure out if there's a sustainable path. The code between the two, the core code between the two, is effectively totally different. Um, the cookbooks that deploy are relatively the same, but not completely compatible. Um, so from a code perspective, I don't see a lot of overlap in code development, which is part of the reason for the fork. Do you agree with that statement?
I mean, that ties in with my impression, yeah.
Okay. All right. And so I think the question to me is from a community perspective, is there a reason to migrate? There's clearly shared lineage. There's clearly from the actual workloads. There's a high degree of overlap, and the skill sets translate, and a lot of the approaches and designs translate. So my hope had been that the community would come over to OpenCrowbar because architecturally it addresses the limitations in Crowbar 1, and we'd be able to keep it as a single community. But that only really works if there's a gradual decrease in Crowbar 1 activity and people flow to Crowbar 2. If that's not going to happen, then we could acknowledge a fork of the community also.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, well, I'll speak for anyone else outside SUSE, but I think what's prevented us from coming across is that we just needed to get a product out the door, and OpenCrowbar is still not there, so we didn't really have any choice. And as I understand it, there's probably still quite a bit of work left to get it to the stage where it could deploy OpenStack and be on feature parity with a sort of vanilla Crowbar 1.x. So the question becomes for us, and presumably for other people in the community, by the time OpenCrowbar is capable of doing that, what other solutions are going to be on the scene? And then it's a question of investment. And I agree with you, and of course we're probably both biased in this respect, so that the orchestration engine in Crowbar 2 is a really nice thing. I think it's got a lot of promise. I'm obviously biased because I was involved in the planning, the design of that. But that's without momentum in the project and a community behind it, all that kind of nice design and core technology is really not much use when it's pitched against something else that's kind of bigger, even if it's potentially kind of uglier competitor. But at the end of the day, the community momentum is a really critical thing. So I'd like to hear in the discussion today, what the community's position is on that, on like how are we going to grow the community and sustain the project? Because I think, and I've probably been boring people about this for a long time now, but without molding the project into a state where it attracts community, I don't think it's ever going to really grow. And obviously, without enough developers, then it's just going to stay like a really nice prototype and never get anywhere further.
No, I completely agree with you. That's the charge for me, is to see if what we've done attracts a community. I believe that the Anvil release puts OpenCrowbar in a I believe it's ahead of Crowbar One feature set as far as it doesn't have the field trials and burn-in that Crowbar One has, but uh, from parity with the base, I can deploy an OS and install an OS and set up a network and do those things. Uh, it's 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 there. It's ahead from a scale perspective, right? And what the transparency and addressing a lot of the issues that we had, and bringing features like IPv6, um, and being able to be heterogeneous OS. I mean, you you understand the architectural pieces very very well. Getting out of the chef limitations and addressing those things. Those are all there. Um, it is a question really of user momentum and developer support for that. Um, and this is why I think it's important for and I'll get this built uh, to do a comparison matrix and show how Crowbar stacks up against another infrastructure. Because to make this work, somebody will have to take the the leap that says, okay, this can work. If I start using it, it can do this work for me. Um, and I guess we'll talk about that in the community piece. Um, as far as the OpenStack pieces, which I think are a primary driver for this, um, that's a matter of porting to the upstreams. I actually, our team and there's some people on the team who are doing this work. We're actively doing the Icehouse cookbooks and bringing in the upstreams for that. And so it's not a matter of going off and doing it on your own like we've had to do in the past. It's really a matter of being part of the open source community, the upstream community for OpenStack. Uh, and so I think it's very doable. It's going to take evaluating and seeing what's going to happen. Um, Somebody's got to be the first people to step in the community and be there. One thing, I guess, to put a fine point in the Crowbar One discussion versus Crowbar Two. Um, I don't see any realistic way. Maybe people are doing this better than I thought of getting the hardware support in Crowbar One in a sustainable state without somebody like Dell doing it. Because I know how much effort it took from Dell. I believe HP was doing it to an extent. I haven't seen anybody open source the hardware capabilities, and with Crowbar 2, I think we can make that much more sustainable, much easier to do, so that it wouldn't be a matter of Crowbar is just a Razor replacement where you can boot an OS and install it, but you actually can do the hardware provisioning, which is really what separated Crowbar from the start.
So by that, can you just clarify? Are you talking about things like RAID and BIOS or?
Yes, that's it. No, it's specific. RAID and BIOS configuration is a big piece of the value proposition that Dell was getting from the versions they were doing and what customers saw as a benefit. And Crowbar 2, when we re-architected it, specifically addressed how to make that more repeatable and easier for other people to do, because that was a problem, and also how to do it out of band. So to be able to talk to WS-MAN interfaces directly through the API instead of having to do it from a boot image inside the machine. I mean, that's a significant advantage. And I was just listening to some people talk about OpenLMI and capabilities for that, and even those types of actions, you need a driver infrastructure or an orchestration infrastructure to really make that stuff work.
So I suppose one question did occur to me on the with regards to the Dell announcement. Just occurred to me off the back of what you just said about the OpenStack bits. So this means so there were people on the Dell team who had made some progress on the OpenStack bar clamps, and does this mean that now becomes a spare time kind of hobby effort for them?
And unless somebody sponsors it, I don't, right, and that would be the alternative. But yes, for the Dell employees, it's a spare time activity. They're in the community, and if people are trying to pick it up, we can be resources for people who are trying to spin it up. Uh, that is right. Dell's Dell's not trying to kill the project. We're trying to launch it into the community. And so,
So,
yeah.
Rob, this is Gil.
Hey, Gil.
What do you mean sponsor it? Say a few more words.
Thank you. That's the exact thing that I'm looking for. So, there's a certain degree of crowbar work that I think there are people who will do spare time, but it's much more of a project that accomplishes a business function, bringing up hardware, things like that. So sponsoring specifically means a company that wants to implement crowbar that's willing to pay for consulting individuals to do consulting work on it. I've been approached by individuals who want to do crowbar consulting and would do crowbar consulting if contracts were available. Um, Obviously, I can act as an intermediary with that, but I'm not going to, at this point, create a list of names because that would not be kosher. And or companies who want to have a developer or person on staff who has some degree of time dedicated to running this, actually building the system and making it work. So Dell had a certain degree of engineers. SUSE has a certain degree of engineers who are effectively committed to making crowbar operations work. Those are the types of sponsorships that I was looking for. I think that, and after talking to people at the summit, it's possible that you'll see some other vendors come in who see what we're doing and understand that they can work with crowbar to accomplish similar objectives, right? Provisioning physical gear, and they might be coming in to support their solutions or their capabilities. So that would be a corporate sponsor, like a user sponsor, where you're trying to accomplish a specific goal and can put some development time onto it. The same type of person who was actually interested in hiring consulting to help do that, and then um, an actual vendor who would come in and provide support for that. So if SUSE decided to move to OpenCrowbar, they would effectively be the vendor spot. I would love to see over time an actual ecosystem where you could buy paid support and things like that. And if that occurs, that would be another category of sponsorship for the project.
Okay, so there's multiple options for us to proceed if we decide to. We'll talk more about this tomorrow.
Exactly, and I can tell you that there are people who are interested in supporting the community, and I've talked to people on both sides. It's a bootstrapping exercise of understanding the value proposition, which is part of my job to help explain the value proposition of what we've built. Because Adam's exactly right. Right now, it's a project that has a lot of interesting potential until we've got 1,000 node deployment. It's potential. To me, that's the milestone we want to achieve. I feel very confident in the capabilities to do that because we've been testing it to up into the hundreds so far. And that's actually, to me, a good topic for next week's design call. We can figure out what we want to talk about. Is it scale? Is it OpenStack? And this is why I was prioritizing this list. I'm getting ahead of myself on the call.
Okay. Thank you. That's what I wanted to hear. At least I understand, because I'm talking to Toby tomorrow about this as well. So.
Cool.
Okay. Thanks.
And I'm available to help explain the capabilities, and I'll be very honest about what we've done and what we haven't done and where the limitations are. It's an open source project. I do not want to oversell what we've done. I don't want to undersell it either. But
yeah, no, I totally understand.
And so I don't want to cut that. I want to keep going on that topic a little bit, but I do want to talk through some of the things and add to this list too of places where I've heard people have a lot of interest around, well, if you could do that, that would be a really powerful story. And I put together some of the items in the agenda, but I'd love to hear people, sort of validate those, and hear if there's other things that people would like to see done. Oh, and I had one logistics note along those. Maybe this is a good transition point. Other questions about community support, what that means, and what we're trying to do? Okay. I'm happy if somebody else wants to help act as a clearinghouse. Please let me know or speak up or send into the list. For now, I'm perfectly willing to do that. People have already been coming to me in that capacity. Just from a small logistics note, we had been moving towards using Dell infrastructure, the Jira server that Dell had set up for tracking features and bugs and backlog for OpenCrowbar. And I'm going to suggest that we just move to GitHub for that activity. So I already started doing that to an extent, but if we're actually using the releases somewhere in here. We're already using releases and bugs and things like that. So if you have feature ideas or bugs, things like that, please just log them using GitHub, and we'll start tracking them that way. It's adequate for where we are right now, and if we outgrow it, then we'll deal with that. Any other questions or concerns about that? I want to start that off in the right place. Okay. Before I suspect the rest of this this call is going to focus entirely onto priorities for development. I know that we're playing with a couple of different things in the background. I'm specifically working to clean up the documentation index. There's a hanging chad from the Anvil release. So the number one thing I would ask people to do is if you're playing with OpenCrowbar and learning it, please take a second to fix documentation errors or add to documentation. That's we tried to leave that in a very good position, but it always needs more work. And all the documentation for OpenCrowbar is in the core docs directory. We have no other. This is the authoritative source. It's one of the things we cleaned up from the migration from Crowbar 1. Adam, if you want, and perhaps this is another topic, I don't want to spring it on you, but we can talk about, reopen the cleaning up Crowbar 1 repos and that website and things like that, because I think it is a matter of confusion for people.
Yeah.
So, because we should. I know that let me go back to this point. The matter of splitting the community between Crowbar and OpenCrowbar, I don't think is resolved. And it sounded like that would be a future conversation. We need to figure out how to do it, because I really don't want to lose the momentum either for Crowbar 1 or Crowbar 2. Because I know SUSE has done some amazing work with OpenStack deployments that I'd love to see the communities able to converge again. But at the same time, I also want to make sure that we don't keep things around that limit Crowbar 1's ability to deliver that value, because you guys have created a lot of value there. I do know that Dell is still supporting customers on Crowbar 1, and we'll still be sensitive about some of the conversations about limiting branches and things like that. But with this new stance, we'll be much more willing to say, clean up what you need to clean up. I can probably proxy for that. Does that help? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't really know what to do about. I mean, there's a question of, like, if new people come along and they hear about Crowbar, I guess the first question is where do they gravitate towards? Do they find crowbar.github.io, then they get a bunch of instructions for Crowbar 1, which are generally broken, I think.
I think they are quite. So the request I would have is there's some somebody be able to join us today. I had somebody approach me at the summit who was interested in helping create the OpenCrowbar website and help get a dedicated landing page for that. I think the question for SUSE and Crowbar and the Crowbar as proxy for the Crowbar 1 community is how do you want to link those together? Because I would love to see us take that crowbar.github.io site and make it very clear. There's two paths through the community. Sorry, getting an outside ping. Does that make sense, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, well, anything we can do to clear things up. But there's, there's a question about how we set expectations about, like people who come to the project. That I guess different people expect different things. Maybe some people have heard about the OpenCrowbar work, and they're interested in the sort of newer generation of orchestration engine, and maybe they want to get involved in that. I suspect most people will come to it through the need to, or the desire to provision OpenStack automatically in some way. And so we need to set expectations around, what they can achieve with which code base, and then to have a recommended, like a quick start guide for getting that working. Because at the moment, we get a mail or two every week, maybe on the mailing list of somebody who's tried to build a Crowbar 1, like a Roxy ISO or something like that, and then they run into problems every time, and they'll
right.
Ask on IRC, generally not get a reply. Ask on the mailing list, often not get a.
That actually brings up a question, because we have Ubuntu and CentOS versions of Stony that could address some of these issues, but Dell is no longer positioned to help support those if people have community questions around them. We didn't sell them, so there's no support requirements around it. But I think that would help drive adoption for the work that has been done on Crowbar 1. If we made those available, can your team help troubleshoot that? Is that of interest?
I think anything built through the ISO building process with the dev tool, I don't think will have bandwidth to support.
Well said. I understand. Okay. I've always been lately hesitant to put those out because once we switch to OpenCrowbar, we don't do dev tool work at all. I think we haven't done it yet, but we were supposed to have a mock funeral for it. So for people who haven't tracked us that carefully, this has been a long-standing sore point. SUSE rightly felt that DevTool was very hard to maintain and built a different way to create the ISOs, actually RPMs, that became the model, the blueprint model we used in OpenCrowbar when we cut. But because we were so invested in the DevTool, we couldn't do it with we had to fork. We couldn't fix DevTool without breaking a whole bunch of backwards stuff. And so it's been actually one of the banes of OpenCrowbar users. It helps build the ISO, but it also is very tricky to troubleshoot, and it's very specific. It is completely gone in OpenCrowbar. OpenCrowbar has a much simpler architecture. That's why we forked it into a new repo, because we couldn't figure out an easier way to pay down that debt. Yeah, I have the same concerns. We don't have a open, Crowbar. It's Crowbar one is not particularly transparent, and so when things break, people need a certain degree of handholding for it. It's one of the first things we tried to fix with Open Crowbar. Um,
I mean, there's one thing I can say, which is that if anyone comes along to the Crowbar community and wants to try, like a Roxy or Stony-based Crowbar for OpenStack, then we can certainly support them in trying out SUSE Cloud.
Okay.
I mean, there's, even, before they give us a cent, it's free software, obviously. We're always keen for people to try it out, and if, and help them with that. And if they don't like it, they can just walk away, but, hopefully we'll help them get it working and turn them into interested customers. So I think we'll always have time to invest in that. But up till now, the main sort of port of entry for Crowbar newbies has been pick up an ISO, based on Ubuntu, for example, and run with that. And because we don't use that image building process, we can't support it, and we don't really have any sort of driving motive to support that.
No,
So as a result, we haven't really been able to support newbies coming to the community, and that the same goes for maintaining the website, the GitHub.io website, the documentation, the quick start thing on there is very much oriented around that, and it's incomplete and probably outdated, but we can't help with that because it just doesn't. It's not anything we have expertise in.
right. I would suggest that we replace that homepage just with links to direct people to use Crowbar One with OpenSUSE, and if you can give them, write up specific directions for that. I've promoted the work you're doing on my personal blogs, and feel like that deserves a lot of props. And so I'd like to get a clear track to that because I think that that's important. I would like to be able to say more definitively that we're maintaining one community, that the goal of what Crowbar does is DevOps around these deployments, and well, the core changed, the goal structure, a lot of the approaches haven't, and so the communities we can stay together as one community. Make those types of statements in the GitHub, in that base landing page, and then point people to Crowbar, Open Crowbar, a landing page for that, and then the SUSE Cloud pieces for Crowbar One, because I think at this point you're the only active maintainers on that. Where if people actually want to try out Crowbar One, we should point them to the OpenSUSE experience.
Yeah, actually, it's based on SLAS only at the moment. What I would like to do would be to provide Vagrant, a Vagrant environment, so that it's as simple as Vagrant up for people who do want to try it out. And in fact, that's exactly what I, together with some colleagues, was working very hard on in the preparation for the workshop that we gave on Thursday last week, where we showed SUSE Cloud with the HA capability, and so that was built on a Vagrant environment, and it was basically Vagrant up will deploy an admin node, deploy 2 controller nodes and a compute node, and then set them all up. And all you need really is the Git repository with the Vagrant file in, and a couple of boxes which I intend to upload to Vagrant Cloud. So I mean that might be one quick start approach that we could publish on the website.
Okay. Well, let's coordinate offline from this as a item for this sprint to fix that base page and create the 1 and 2, and then if you want to talk out of band on this, we can figure out what the community message is. if there's a strong sense on from anybody's side that we want to fork the community, then let's talk. We can talk about that in the next call or in 2 weeks, um, and see what the ramifications would be and how to do that. I have a strong preference to not fork the community if we can avoid it. Otherwise, I would have just renamed Crowbar when we forked the code base. I didn't. I didn't. It doesn't seem to be to anybody's advantage to fork the community.
I guess it depends on what you really mean by fork the community. I mean, that development is already forked to all intents and purposes.
Yes.
And along with it, obviously we're in different GitHub organizations, which means different wiki, different issue tracker, and so on. So I think the only things that are really shared amongst the whole community now are the IRC channel and the mailing list. Have I missed anything?
No, that's right. And the name.
Right. Well, kind of.
Kind of.
Yeah. OpenCrowbar. Yeah.
So this is the question I think comes back to is there and I don't want to go too much longer because I do actually want to talk about the future development priorities, but so for a future conversation we should talk about is the goal to migrate into Open Crowbar or to extend the life of Crowbar in such a way that they actually never that the work that never reconverges. That to me is the question about the community. Is the destination, and this is a delicate topic, right? Is the destination for ultimately Crowbar users to become Open Crowbar users, or is it for them to sustain a separate path? And some of that comes back to a decision. If Open Crowbar is a sustained project, then yes. If it's not, then no. And either way, it can remain one community. Anyway, let's talk on that. If you want to talk out of band, we can do that, Adam, or however we want to do it.
Okay.
I wasn't expecting to close that topic right now.
Hey, Rob, Dave here. Is part of that topic, should the mailing list maybe move away from Dell's direct control also? And if the idea is to set it free and let it flourish, then being on a Dell-maintained Crowbar list may not be the best choice.
There's no indication that Dell's going to shut down the list. I agree with you. It wouldn't be very hard to move it to a new site. It's just a bootstrapping question. So my preference would be to change as little as possible while we're sort of reforming the community, and then I don't know. It's a great question. It might be easier to fix it now and then reform onto the new list, but we might lose people by doing that. I don't know. Do you have a thought on it?
Well, if half the argument of backing away and letting it be vendor agnostic is to, allow the community to develop any way they want, then making it truly agnostic as quickly as possible is probably going to help more than it would hurt.
That makes sense. Do people have objections to that? All right, I'll start the transition process. I think that's reasonable. I'll talk to Judd, who maintains the OpenCrowbar.org site, and see if he has ideas that we could actually use that as the list name. But there's just it's easy enough to set up a Google group or list or something like that.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, and that way it would tie into the calendar that we already have. I think that's pretty straightforward. Good suggestion. Thank you. And I think if we do that, then we've cut. I think that's the last real obvious tie, unless somebody can think of another one. and I'm not actually, and I'm not sure which I think for Dell employees contributing on their own time, we wouldn't change copyrights, but new files would show up as individual copyrights. Um, we still have to maintain the Apache, should maintain the Apache 2 license. And then if there's sponsored work, if people are sponsoring the work, they'll assert their copyright with the Apache 2 license, which is pretty typical. I've already been pulling the Dell sponsorship out of the OpenCrowbar pieces. I haven't gone back to Crowbar 1 branches. Cool. All right. Boy, we just went down the rabbit hole a little bit. I'll read this list of things I heard people interested in, and I'd love to hear additions or have somebody, people +1 on these. Getting the OpenStack, and this is specifically OpenCrowbar focused. Getting the OpenStack upstream integrations working, and by the thought here would be the minimal. So it's Nova, Keystone, Glance. There's others, but I think just that would let people stay in touch.
Yeah, including Neutron, right? Please say Neutron.
No. My thought would be NovaNet for this. The trick is
that doesn't do us any good.
Well, but here's the trick. It's what's in upstream, and so and so that's Gil.
Yeah.
We could talk about doing a lot more than this. What I'm trying to do is, until we have sponsored work, and whoever sponsors the work chooses whatever priorities they want, where I would say people who want to be active in the community but do it on their own time, what they would look at is some of what I'm driving here. I think that Neutron is very doable with what we've done, but it's going to require more effort, and the community cookbooks are less mature there. I may be very blunt on this.
You mean the StackForge stuff? The stuff that's in StackForge?
The StackForge stuff. Yeah. Maybe they've made a lot more progress than the last time I did a deep dive on it.
Yeah, I don't know.
But SUSE in Crowbar 1 did some amazing, and I think that is actually the appropriate adverb or adjective, amazing Neutron work with some HA capabilities and all sorts of stuff. So one of the things I would love to see, and community love to SUSE for doing this, I'd love to see that work come to the upstreams and OpenCrowbar, because they've done such good work on OpenStack. I'd love to see that, speaking from an OpenStack perspective, in upstream so that we could all collaborate on it. But just from having somebody use OpenCrowbar to install OpenStack, that's my first thought. But once we've gotten the upstream integration pattern built, whatever's in upstream should just work. Nothing ever just works. Sorry.
This may not be the right time to ask this question. Maybe we can talk about it tomorrow. But do you know, from a timing perspective, when I may be able to demo something like that?
The upstream integration.
Yeah.
That we're getting. I'm getting some scoping done on that. It could be, if you're just doing the basics, it could be pretty fast. There's some engineers, I don't see them on the call anymore, who were doing that work and could give a more exact estimate.
We can talk more about it tomorrow. When we talk, I think it's tomorrow. But yeah.
I would love to see this going, because I've seen the upstream chef work progressing, but there's no way to sort of automate the installation. You have to do it manually. And so what we have in Crowbar 1, is a huge step forward compared to the upstreams, because there's no central orchestration. We did an incredible amount of Ceph work, although it still needs tuning and checks and testing. But there is a Ceph workload for OpenCrowbar will deploy Ceph. It's IPv6 only right now, but that work could also be sponsored and continue. And that actually uses Ceph's upstream cookbooks, which I think need to get moved. What I heard was the OpenStack version of the Ceph cookbooks was better. We'll probably want to migrate to that. Dell had stopped the Anvil release. We were just about to start doing the WSMan interfaces for the Dell R series gear. And so that work, so all the code is open, but porting it to OpenCrowbar hasn't been completed. I think that's really interesting to do, although I got a lot more interest from an open compute perspective, and being able to use Crowbar to do open compute. And these are both doable. It's just a matter of prioritization. And I know that some of the open compute sponsors have been interested in finding management infrastructure to help with that. And then when I talked about open compute, people would also ask about Cumulus and being able to bring up the Cumulus switch integration. So being able to, Cumulus is a Linux switch OS, and so the idea of being able to install and provision both the switches and the servers was very interesting to people for obvious reasons. We'd been talking for a while. I'm jumping to CoreOS. So OpenCrowbar is the only thing I've seen that can manage physical infrastructure under VMs and containers, like Docker specifically. And one of the things that we've been talking about internally was the idea of deploying CoreOS as laying down the physical infrastructure for it, and then allowing etcd or Flynn or Brooklyn or whatever management you want on top of that to do its stuff. I think that's very achievable. We've been looking at doing that. It's adding another OS. And then at the summit, I heard quite a bit about this pattern of using Ansible to install Chef or Puppet, because people like the SSH approach. OpenCrowbar uses the same, very similar control plane, SSH, to talk to the nodes. But I think there's less cognitive dissonance between that and Salt, using Crowbar for Salt, Chef, or Puppet. We already have the Chef and Puppet pieces in code. So I'm interested in seeing if there's community interest in using Crowbar for that instead of Ansible for that, because then you conceivably get the bare metal bring up piece that Ansible doesn't do. Ansible's moving towards Chef parity, not physical infrastructure parity. Things to add on the list? That was my list.
Yeah. I don't know whether you'd consider this a development item, but I certainly do. And I would actually personally put it right at the top, even above the OpenStack work, and that is to provide a vagrant environment so that people can be up and running with it in a one-liner effectively.
Okay. Have you tried the Docker piece we did?
I have not tried anything to do with OpenCrowbar, but I was just looking at the quick start kind of guide on GitHub just now, and it looks like all the tasks that are listed for setting up either through Docker or through VirtualBox are exactly the kind of things that Vagrant could automate into a one-liner. And I think it looks like these docs are actually, pretty clear and straightforward, but to be honest, I think even a couple of pages of instructions is too much of a learning curve, or should I say, enough of a learning curve to deter people from trying it out.
I think that's a great suggestion.
So, and I would not expect that getting that Vagrant environment up and running would be that much work, right? I mean, it's just you basically need a vagrant file.
Yeah, Judd had done a lot of work on Crowbar 1 for this, and it consistently had trouble penetrating through the proxy firewall environment that Dell employees had to deal with, and so sustaining it for the Dell developers was quite a challenge. It could be that if we just assume an open development environment, that it's a much simpler story. So it's something to look at. I agree with you. It's a great suggestion.
Do you mean like penetrating through the firewall for downloading boxes or for something else? Because I would have thought that ideally you can just like clone the Git repository or even download the zip from GitHub and download a box, and then you should be good to go even without any network. Or am I missing something?
You are. Especially the open. One of the things that we changed in OpenCrowbar was we stopped pre-caching all of the dependencies on that ISO. So one of the reasons, so OpenCrowbar is online mode by default, which makes it a lot smaller from that perspective, but also means that you have to be able to, you can't do a deployment without being connected to the internet.
Right. But I mean, the idea I had was that the box would contain all the dependencies. I mean, that's how I did it for the workshop last week, is that there was a box for the admin node, and that served all the dependencies that the other nodes require. So that's effectively
it does still proxy through the admin node, and we've added, there's a squid proxy actually built into it, so you get a certain degree of caching from that, and it sets up that relationship, but you still have to have the admin node connected to an outbound. And we did that work and got it going. Anyway, the Dell corporate environment was always presented a challenge from a development perspective. Connecting through networks was always a little bit tricky, dicey.
So, Rob,
Yeah.
if on the Ceph work, does that include integrating Ceph to support Glance, Cinder, and Swift API?
So that would be, it should. So I'd split those into two things.
Yeah, for Cinder, for Swift, Cinder, and Glance, right?
Correct. So just bringing up Ceph is its own thing, especially because you have to get the RAID and BIOS configuration.
That's why I was mentioning it, because it could be two separate things.
Yeah, it makes sense to do it, and it's actually Hadoop. I just haven't talked to as many people about this because I'm not in that community as much. And actually, from this perspective, we in the Crowbar 1 repos, there's actually Cloudera API integration, and being able to integrate with Cloudera as part of the open source work. So once again, this is you're installing 100 nodes at a time. It's amazingly powerful to be able to get all these things deployed right. And this comes back to actually I meant to bring this up. So one of the clarifying points for Crowbar, OpenCrowbar, is I've been trying to use this ready state infrastructure, or ready state. A lot of what Crowbar is doing is it's coming up to ready state, and that's hard. The whole RAID, BIOS configuration, networking, that whole base level ready state. And then a lot of the things we're talking about are workloads on top of ready state, which I think are also valuable. But some of what Crowbar does is it's this ready state infrastructure management, and then we'll bolt workloads on, if that makes sense. In the past, in Crowbar 1, the workloads got very connected into what Crowbar was, and it became impossible to extricate the OpenStack piece from Crowbar piece. one of OpenCrowbar's goals was to keep that separation a little bit more. Excellent. Good point. Thank you, Mike.
Hey, Rob, I just wanted to mention what we were looking at was potentially having a Hadoop readiness bar clamp that just configures nodes for a generic Hadoop rather than something Cloudera specific.
Excellent.
So that was some work in progress. Before we get off the Vagrant environment, I hate to drag us back, but one of the historical things with Crowbar is it was kind of tied to supporting a Windows environment because of the Dell corporate setups. Would love to toss it out there. Is that still a requirement or among the community, or do people feel that we'd be better being more Linux focused?
That's an excellent question. One of the things that the SSH focus creates is it makes it harder. We're going to have to look at how we do Windows, and we're going to have to build a remote PowerShell jig effectively. Or you're thinking Windows specifically?
I'm thinking Windows as the development platform, not specifically deploying on Windows.
Sorry. I'm not expecting us to change off of that particularly much. Yeah, let's make it, because Vagrant, you're stumping me.
And so, the reason I brought it up is, in general, I think the environments aren't that bad, but some of the Vagrant stuff under Windows was a little tricky.
That's what. Yeah, we kept getting hit on that.
And
it's probably
we kept getting hit on things like VirtualBox under Windows as well, which was a platform for some people.
Yeah, and I think
I don't know if we need to answer it here. I just think we may want to open that up for discussion in the future.
That's an interesting question because Linux or Mac focus might be way things end up a little bit more. That's a community. It's a great question for the community.
That's one of the advantages I see in Vagrant is that because it's got multiple providers, it does keep options open in terms of VirtualBox or Docker or libvirt or whatever, and it in theory shouldn't be too much of a stretch to support more than one approach, because the bits that are specific to one hypervisor can go in that chunk of the Vagrant file, and the bits which are common can be shared across all of them, and that can be managed in a sort of DevOps approach to the development environment rather than trying to maintain multiple sets of instructions for people to read and follow through.
Yeah. No, and I think that some of those instruction sets could be collapsed when into one or two sets. But yeah, Vagrant does help with that. But a lot of what ended up happening, I think, after we created some of those paths through the documentation is we completed the Docker container work for the admin node, and then that streamlined quite a bit. Good. Sounds like we have more topics for next week. What I was hoping to do next week is prioritize this list and then talk through what it would take to start building these things. I'll circulate this list on I will circulate the new list to the old list, and then we can start a discussion on the new list about prioritizing these topics and if people want to pull them in. And Adam, if I can be a resource for your team, please let me know. I'm happy to do a demo and bring you guys up to speed. And if you want to talk about some of the one-on-one conversations I've been having about building the community, I can happily do that. We're still at the phase where a lot of the community building is happening starred from me. We're not yet at a point where the community is connecting to each other yet. And I'm pretty confident that'll start happening.
Okay.
All right, everybody, we've gone a little bit over. Thank you for being patient, and I'm looking forward to working with y'all on our new list and on the new series of calls we're starting. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks.